Happy Wednesday evening to everyone out there in the Woo Nation. It, of course, is your guys back for another fantastic episode of Woo Fantasy. Right here on Rotoballer.com. That is Rotoballer.com. Your one-stop shop for all things fantasy. The best premium content out there going today. Rotoballer.com. Get you a special discount at checkout with promo code WooFantasy, and also presented to you by Underdog Fantasy, the best ball spot to go to for fantasy football drafts right now on the web. And Underdog Fantasy, promo code WOO, get you an extra $25 on your first deposit. So go in there, drop it in, WOO. As always, I'm joined by the co-host, Mr. Nick Heffley. How we doing, sir?
They might not be able to say it, but I can. Never fear, Underdog is here.
Never fear, Underdog is here. For those of you that are a little bit more on the aged side, yes, the good old fantastic Underdog cartoon back from the 80s.
Like the 50s.
Or God, dude, yeah, it's got to be the 70s and 80s when Underdog was going.
We grew up in the 80s. I just know there's a bunch of cartoons that we watched that were made.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know is like Transformers and G.I. Joe and stuff from back in the day. That's what I was watching.
Never fear, Underdog is here.
So
they should use that tagline. I'm good though, man.
You would think that. That's a great tagline to use for the website. That's why they do use dogs on the imprints of every one of like your draft slots on the draft board.
And that's why we're sponsors. Woo!
That's right. Woo! On Underdog. So definitely jump in there. Extra to $25 on your first deposit on Woo. So as always, like I said, we're back this week. We're going to jump into some tight end discussion later on in the show. That was kind of the premise of tonight's podcast. We'll get into that. But as always, of course, like, subscribe, share all of our fun stuff here. Yes, post questions. If you've got anything, keeper, dynasty, redraft questions, this is fantasy football draft month, the month of August. So we know you've got drafts coming up. If you've got questions, we've got answers. How about that tagline? That's trademarked somewhere. I'm sure.
That's the old probably a lot of.
What is it? The Home Depot tagline is you've got questions, we've got answers, or is that Lowe's? I can't remember.
No, that's.
It's one of actually. It's one of those two. But anyways,
yeah, it is one of the two.
So, actually popping right in, we got somebody jumping in with. Woo! Woo! You got to enjoy that when we get some interaction from the guys out there. Now, I do want to jump in real quick before we kind of get into some things.
Here we go.
I do I've got a question that was actually asked earlier today, and I wanted to save it for the show here. Is one of the followers on Twitter, it's at bshep712. He has a question that he wanted answered from earlier today.
It's season long. You're getting to it before we even start.
Yeah, just want to kind of get it out there and get it discussed as we're kind of rolling into things here. But a season-long 12-team half-point PPR. You start 2 running backs, 2 wide receivers, tight end flex. It's a super flex league as well. He's got the first pick in the draft. Who you got? Quarterback, running back. Where are you going? First pick of the draft in a super flex draft, mind you. So this is coming back from our experience doing the Scott Fishbowl League.
You said it was a flex and a super flex spot, or just one super flex spot?
It's the one super flex spot.
Oh, okay. That's changing things a little bit different.
Changes some things.
If there was 2 spots, I would absolutely say to go quarterback. But I'm one overall. I'm going Christian McCaffrey. Yeah,
I wanted to agree with that point as well. I think even if it's a regular flex and a super flex spot, I'm going to go with Christian McCaffrey either way. I think he's the bona fide number 1 pick either way any way you want to slice it. I think that's what you got to go with is Christian McCaffrey there. Now, kind of transition that into, because I was doing, of course, we'll get into my flex draft and stuff. We'll talk about that here in just a few minutes as well. But I was also in the room and doing the computer work for the Superflex draft, which curveball on you. If you paid attention to last week's podcast, I was going to be in the Superflex draft, but we had some things kind of switch around and kind of to appease people with travel issues. Steffi Smalls, she actually was in the regular flex draft, could not make that draft, so I tagged out.
Lucky you.
And got into the flex league, the regular snake draft, and she was in the super flex. So I did the computer work for that. Scott Engel had the first pick in the super flex draft, and he went Patrick Mahomes. And this is a super flex. That's a regular flex and one super flex. So he went Patrick Mahomes in that draft. So kind of do with it what you will at that point. But I know me and Nick, we do both agree. We would both go Christian McCaffrey, especially with the one super flex that you have in that lineup. So
I think especially more than, because I mean you don't have a lot of spots there, and good and well every week, depending on if you have any weird rules in there, you're going to probably start two quarterbacks there, and especially if you're not going to be starting a lot more running backs and wide receivers, I want those spots to be shored up before anything else. So.
Without a doubt. But I think that's kind of the easy way to go with. I think the way that a lot of these drafts unfold too, so the comeback as you kind of roll back into the back end of round 2 and into round 3, you're going to be able to get a good qualified bona fide QB1 as your starter there at the back end of round 2. And even if you want to go double dip and go 2 straight quarterbacks, that's what I would probably do. I would solidify my running back. Yeah, I would solidify my running back with Christian McCaffrey and then double dip at the position and grab 2 solid starters at quarterback to get things rolling.
Sure.
So
yeah, you can go like a Stafford Brady type round 2, round 3, depending on how the quarterbacks go there. I mean, I think that's a solid move. Depending on how well, this could be a league to where like a league that Brandon and I do. You know exactly where some of these guys are going. If you know these guys and know they're going to sit on quarterback for a little bit, you may even take that best player available along with a quarterback in round 3. Wait till round, wait till that 4 or 5, spot to be able to go ahead and take that next quarterback there as well. So,
yes, exactly. So, we want to get into kind of get in some news and notes from around the league, training camp news and notes, things of that nature. Of course, we did have last night. We had Hard Knocks start for the Dallas Cowboys. First episode.
I haven't had a chance to watch it, so don't go too much into it. I'm still a day or so behind.
Not gonna spoil anything. There's not been a spoiler to that degree, but if you watched the show last night, it pretty much reiterated my thoughts that I've had on this podcast and any other thing that I've done out there on Twitter and stuff like that. Is people have been asking me, and that was the question that was asked of me too during the flex draft when I selected Dak Prescott in that draft. How worried that I was of Dak Prescott's shoulder injury. That's currently ongoing. But if you watched the show last night, it was pretty much kind of the thing that you figured out there is that it was just a fatigue thing. I mean, he got out there and like I've reiterated, the guy's been going out there and he wanted to take every single rep in practice. He wanted to throw the ball 500 miles an hour with every rep that he took in practice. So the dude just absolutely wore himself out in practice. So that's kind of the nuts and bolts of what I took away from that, just to not kind of spoil anything when it comes to that. So that's really the biggest takeaway that you want to go with that.
I know it's preventative, but I saw he was getting an MRI on that shoulder there today.
Yeah, the precautionary MRI. He's actually thrown in practice the last 2 days. And also Amari Cooper passed his physical and is back on the practice field as well. So those guys ready to just chuck the ball and ready to go, which will lead me into my question here. Amari Cooper back on the practice field. A lot of people have let him slip down in drafts with the absolute skyrocket of CeeDee Lamb's ADP over the course of the last couple of weeks. Are you more comfortable taking Amari Cooper now with his level, his ADP that's kind of dropped a little bit over the last couple of weeks, or are you still kind of buying in? Are you going to buy in with CeeDee Lamb at that current ADP? Because you're seeing him right now, a high end round 3, might even sneak in a late round 2 in some drafts.
I'm not touching him. Not even close at that. I mean, granted, year 2 guy. I mean, he's in a great offense. I just think they're going to spread the ball out a little too much for my liking, enough for me to not take him that high. I think the value for me is with Amari Cooper, and even to your point, even Michael Gallup. I think the value is there a little bit more to where. Do I think CeeDee Lamb's going to have a good year? Yeah, but I would be much more comfortable getting him round 4, round 5 versus his round 2, round 3 ADP where it's going right now. It's way too rich for my blood.
Yeah, I think the buying window, especially with underdog drafts and doing a lot of the best ball formats that I've done, the buying window has closed on CeeDee Lamb over the course of the last week. I've kind of definitely wanted to back off a little bit. I'm going to buy more of Amari Cooper and also Michael Gallup, who coincidentally enough, the news item with Michael Gallup is he's seeing a lot of snaps and a lot of work as a slot receiver in this offense. So I think that adds a level of intrigue with Michael Gallup's potential here for 2021. If he's playing out of the slot, mostly in that offense, I think you're going to see a lot of targets coming his way, because I think Dak Prescott, like I've reiterated it as well, they have a great relationship between Michael Gallup and Dak Prescott going back the last couple of years. So for me, boom, I'm buying in on Michael Gallup, especially in a lot in these kind of those middle rounds of drafts. So I'm all in on the train with Michael Gallup. I've said it all off season long. I think he's kind of a guy you want to buy into, contract year player, opportunity that if we wanted to kind of move him at some point, trade deadline wise, to acquire talent elsewhere, that opportunity is there to get something for him before he walks in free agency, because we're not bringing him back next year. That's pretty much set in stone at this point in time. So,
and let's face it, offense doesn't win championships.
No,
as good as you guys' offense is there,
we will definitely find that out this year.
Ask Aaron Rodgers how it is.
Yeah.
Pat Mahomes, they've had the best offense the last 3 years. They won 1 title. But even they had I would say, above average defense.
Yeah. Yeah. And even if you kind of tie it back into like the New Orleans Saints, great offense for the better part of the last 15 years under Drew Brees. They've got 1 Super Bowl title under their wing.
And had a good defense the last 4 or 5 years.
Yeah. And that was something that I talked about with Rick Lashney, that, a guy that we do the SBFFC with, that won the overall main event title last year, 2020 champion. I was talking to him yesterday, and, we were kind of going back and forth and mentioning some things. He was picking my brain with Dallas Cowboys things, and I was picking his brain with New Orleans Saints stuff. And I reiterated that point too. I said, they've had the defense to win a championship. They've just fumbled away opportunities, and for some reason could not beat the Minnesota Vikings in the first round of the playoffs in a couple of seasons. So I dug at him a little bit with that, and he appreciated it. But yeah, I think all systems are go with this Dallas Cowboys offense. I put that out on Twitter yesterday. Draft with confidence across the board. Whoever your guy is in this offense, draft them with full confidence. They're in store for a big year this year, so go ahead and grab them in your drafts. Staying in the NFC East, we'll stick with a team in the NFC East, the New York Giants. Saquon Barkley, for everyone that was worried, off the pup and back at Giants practice. So full confidence for Saquon Barkley moving forward. And where are you comfortable drafting him right now?
I've had full confidence in him the entire way. He's still going to be a top 4, top 5 running back for me this year. They've got the kind of offense to be able to get things done and really build behind him, even if he is, really in the first couple of weeks, even if he doesn't exactly get a full workload, he's going to get that full workload. The guys behind him are not going to eat into his target share and his carries in there. So I think it's all systems go for Saquon Barkley here.
And on the opposite side of things, on the outside, you still got Kenny Golladay that's banged up, worked a little bit on the side, still looking at that 2 to 3 week time frame there. But a lot of the excitement out of Giants camp has been kind of the progression and how well Sterling Shepard has looked in practices. seems to be a great, kind of under the radar type of guy to grab in your fantasy drafts. I would say right now, PPR formats especially.
Yeah, I mean he's starting to make some plays. I mean he's one of those guys. He's been the consistent guy that's just been there. I mean at this point he's just not a sexy pick. I'll tell you who I'm a little bit more on, and I don't think he's going to have a great year, but he could. I mean I think it's just the ultimate boomer bust pick this year. But Kadarius Toney, I mean he's gone in some of our drafts and not even been drafted. He's a round one guy. Yeah. Granted, they've got a lot of weapons there in New York. I think Daniel Jones is going to be a guy that's going to have a really good, surprising year. And if Kadarius Toney continues to kind of do what he does, or they have an injury in that receiver room, you could see him, especially going toward the end of some of these drafts, be a really good guy, or at the very least somebody to have on your roster for the first couple of weeks and just kind of see what happens.
Yeah, I will definitely agree with that. We'll transition over to another team that's been making the rounds and some news in training camps as well as the Cincinnati Bengals. We're not getting glowing reports from the Bengals out of training camp right now. It seems like a lot of things are missing. Joe Burrow's kind of underperformed somewhat, battled with some inconsistencies. We saw the report a couple of days ago as well that Jamar Chase has been showing troubles separating at the line of scrimmage.
Dropping balls.
If you really want to get down to the nuts and bolts to it, if you do any college tape and really kind of go through film and stuff like that I do in the off season, that's not really anything that's kind of against the norm. If you go back to his 2019 film, Jamar Chase was a guy that was kind of he struggled getting off the line against a lot of those elite SEC defenders, but let's be honest, the dude is a dog. He fights at the point of contact. He goes up, gets balls. He plays really similar to kind of like a Des Bryant. He really kind of fights for contested catches. So I'm not really worried when it comes to a Jamar Chase and what we're expecting to see from him in the NFL moving forward. It's not going to be anything to the degree of like a N'Keal Harry, where everyone was really high on N'Keal Harry coming out, and then you started hearing these camp reports that his separation was just not where it should be, and it seemed like that translated to his NFL career up until this point. Jamar Chase, I think, is going to buck that trend. I think he'll be fine, but when we're looking at this hierarchy of the Bengals pass catchers, you've got Jamar Chase that's seemingly going a lot in drafts ahead of the other two incumbent Bengals. Are you okay with that, or are you drafting one of the other two ahead of Jamar Chase? You're gonna let someone else take that ADP dump, as far as grabbing Jamar Chase at a higher value.
I think with our drafts being next week, I want to see what goes on week one in the preseason here. Mm-hmm. I have Jamar Chase ranked as my very last number 2 receiver. He's at 24 for me. That's where I have him ranked. Do I want him there necessarily? Not really. I think it's a lot. I think it's a lot like the situation that we just talked about in Cowboys camp. You've got somebody that's going that their ADP is just skyrocketing. Not to say that he's not going to have a good year, but I think T. Higgins and even more so for me, Tyler Boyd last year outscored on a per game basis outscored T. Higgins. So I think they're just going to have more weapons there. Again, I think the guy that I want really is Joe Burrow. I don't want him as my number 1. I'd much rather have him as my backup and take him as a high number 2 with a lot of room to be able to grow there. But it's going to be tough, I think, picking a consistent receiver in this offense week in, week out. But Jamar Chase at his current values is a little rich for my blood with some of the other guys behind him there.
Yeah, where you're having to buy Jamar Chase right now, I'm not comfortable pulling the trigger because you can wait a round or two. You can wait another round later and get a T. Higgins. You can probably even jump back 3 rounds later and get Tyler Boyd. And I think you're going to get similar value out of the 3 of those. You're probably going to have some inconsistent weeks. One guy's going to outscore the other one week. And I think you're going to have some ebbs and flows with these pass catchers in certain weeks, similar to the Dallas Cowboys, like what we kind of mentioned there. So yeah, I'm probably out on Jamar Chase right now based on where I'm seeing him go in drafts. I'm just not comfortable dying in currently at that price. ADP wise, I'm much more comfortable with the T. Higgins. I think mm-hmm. That's probably the soft spot I have with pass catchers in the Bengals rotation there. Now, we've mentioned it before and talked about it before, but Joe Mixon continues to get all the rage and all the talk from the offensive coordinator that they're going to run this guy into the ground. Are you buying into the reports there? Are you thinking that he's going to see the highest volume that he's had in his career to this point? But does it deter you in any point whatsoever that the offensive line issues with the Cincinnati Bengals probably might creep up and bite him in the ass when it comes to that?
Yeah, but I mean, I look at situations like this that, if the passing game, if this were an offense that didn't throw the ball as much, I would be a little bit more worried. But I think it's all going to come down to play calling, really. For me at running back, it's all about opportunity. Look, if you're going to give the ball to somebody 20 times a game, even if they get 2.5 yards, that's 50 yards. He's going to get some dump off passes. So, I don't have him as high as I've had him in years past, but I have him at number 15. So, I mean, I think that's, mid-round 2 range we're talking about here with some of the other guys going. I think that's about right for him. Would I be comfortable drafting him at that range, especially with the type of offense that he's in? He's not old. Yeah, I mean, he's coming off an injury. I think he's right for the pick in there to where, yeah, I mean, he's a guy in round 2. I think I would be comfortable taking. Yeah.
So we're kind of around that same range. You're looking at players like J.K. Dobbins, DeAndre Swift. Are you taking either of those two players over Joe Mixon?
I would probably take Mixon right now over both. It's really close between him and J.K. Dobbins. I'm not as big of a fan of Swift as I am like you. I think that Jamal Williams is going to eat into a little bit of his share.
Yes, get on board with the Jamal Williams train.
Okay, B. I mean, it's not necessarily the train. I just don't. That offense is not great.
It's just the sheer fact. Yeah, the offense isn't going to be great, but it's just the sheer fact that they're telling you every single day that this is a split backfield. Mm-hmm. I mean, we've talked about on podcasts past that sure you don't really want to fully buy into coach speak at this point in time of this, the preseason and getting into training camps and things like that, but when they reiterate the same point over and over again, just absolutely, they're splitting time in practices. You have to kind of go with that fact.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, so that's kind of where I'm looking at with that. But kind of speaking of coach speak and things of that nature, we're in prime time fluff pieces right now and confusing ideologies that are out there right now. We're having teams release unofficial depth charts over the last couple of days, and you're seeing crazy things out there right now. Houston Texans, for one, is one that I've seen that came out today, one of their unofficial depth charts. If you go look at their unofficial depth chart right now, you've got Deshaun Watson as the QB4. Obvious, things going on behind the scenes. They're trying to trade him, all the investigation stuff. Yeah, that's fine. I'm cool with that. David Johnson is firmly entrenched as RB3 behind Mark Ingram and Phillip Lindsay. Nico Collins, their prized draft pick that a lot of people are high on, myself being one of them as kind of a late round target, currently sitting at wide receiver 6 on the depth chart behind obviously Brandon Cooks. And then you've also got Kiki QT and Anthony Miller behind Chris Connolly. Chris Connolly and Brandon Cooks listed as the 2 starters for the Houston Texans right now. So confusing.
Confusing.
How are you feeling about that? Or are we kind of buying into some of these depth charts that are out, or are we just we want to see preseason games and want to see how things shake out?
I do want to see some preseason games. We've had a couple drafts that have obviously happened before this even happened, with depth charts coming out. I'm really intrigued to see what's going to go on. We've seen in years past with 4 preseason games, that pretty much, depending on the number of preseason, the number of that preseason game, that's usually how long the starters play. So 1 series or 1 quarter in game 1, 2 series, 2 quarters in game 2, play through halftime in game 3, a series in game 4, don't even see the field. What's that going to mean with 3 games? I think depending on the offense, like the Steelers, you're probably not going to see Big Ben either at all or maybe for a series or 2. Houston's going to be one of those weird situations. Why, you got Ingram and Phillip Lindsay coming in brand new, and David Johnson, who was there last year, and shockingly to most people was actually good when he was healthy. He wasn't healthy that often last year. But
yeah, he was a top 7 back down the stretch last year.
Yeah. I think it's one of those situations there to where let's see what happens in the preseason game. And that's what a lot of it is going to be. It's nice having preseason this year to where you actually see some things. You hear it out there from a lot of analysts and a lot of folks in the fantasy industry that don't pay attention to a lot of things in preseason because it doesn't really matter. I disagree. I think it depends on who's out there. Are the ones playing the ones? Do you have your whole first team offense out there? If there's injuries involved, that's another thing too. But if you're an offense that's out there throwing all your ones out and you happen to see Phillip Lindsay back there running one of the ones and all the other ones are running, that's a sign. If you've got, if you've got your Nico Collins out there running with the ones, some backup linemen and, the number 3 quarterback starting off the game, take that with a grain of salt.
Yeah. So, and to the kind of the previous point you made as far as playing time and teams not putting their starters out there and things like that, I know for sure the Tennessee Titans, I saw that earlier today, none of their starters are going to be playing. Tannehill's not playing. Henry's not playing. Vrabel said Darrington Evans is going to be starting at running back, and they're going to get an extended look at him. I know a lot of people are ready to kind of see Darrington Evans kind of get a full run and really see what he can do because he's the obvious handcuff to Derrick Henry at this point in time. So people kind of want to see how things unfold with that. But yeah, it's been odd. Some of the training camp news that has been coming out and things that have been kind of off-putting, so to speak, with some of the news and notes, and it's just I'm ready to see some game action like what you mentioned. I'm ready to kind of see what some of these teams put in place out there. It will probably be next weekend before we really kind of see some of these starters start to get reps in games. I doubt we see too many teams put their starters out here in technically week 1 of the preseason with all the teams full go coming up this weekend. But it's definitely going to be good to have football back, full slate. For all you degenerate gamblers out there for FanDuel purposes and everything like that, there will be FanDuel game slates for these preseason games. So jump in and have a little bit of fun with that for sure, because I know we're itching to kind of set some lineups, and you will have your opportunity this weekend, especially FanDuel. So moving on from that, we'll jump into my flex draft. Was in New York City. I previously mentioned just this past weekend with the guys, Jake Seeley and all the gang with the Flex Leagues draft that we had on SiriusXM on Saturday. I was in the regular.
Hopefully everybody had a chance to tune in.
Hopefully so. I actually did get some very nice compliments during my draft. I will say that there was a lot of people that were enjoying the Roto Superstars draft throughout the proceedings. I will say that they were giving me a little bit of shine at the top of the broadcast with how I was kind of starting things off. And then of course during my interview segment, talking with Adam Ronis, had a chance to kind of really break down my thought process and things of how I was looking at the board. Drafted from the 12th spot in this draft. So that was a little bit of change for me from originally in the Superflex, where I was going to be from the 8th spot. Switching into this one here came at the turn. And if you've been listening to some of these podcasts that we've done in the Raz Bowl, I've been back into the draft and drafting with Giants. I've been at the back end of the draft. So a lot of these industry drafts that I've been competing in, I'm getting stuck at the end of these drafts. So I actually have some experience leading into this flex draft this past weekend. So kind of just to break down, and we'll kind of go through, I'll buzz through the first round real quick. Starts off McCaffrey, Cook, Kamara, Elliott, Henry, 5 straight running backs off the board. Are you shocked? at all by that, the way that starts.
I'm surprised it wasn't more.
So, yeah, and then it does. That's when we start to see the curveball thrown in here. Because at the 6th spot, David Ganos goes Tyreek Hill, first receiver off the board, which was a shocker. That threw me for a little bit of a loop because I was expecting that to be Travis Kelce there. Devontae Adams at pick 7 goes to John Daigle. We'll get more into that here in a second. And then our good friend EY, Eric Young, Impact Wrestling star, goes Travis Kelce at pick 8, which I see that was a no-brainer pick at that spot. Then we go Jake Seeley gets Barkley at 9. Jamie Eisenberg from CBS Sports gets Aaron Jones at pick 10. And right in front of me, Matt Schauf goes with Stephon Diggs, pick 11. Leaving me at the turn, I go Antonio Gibson, followed up with Nick Chubb to start my draft here. So we had 8 of the picks in the first round were running back. It seems about right. I was expecting to see more come off the board because I was expecting Tyreek Hill and Stephon Diggs to be guys that were going to float into the second round. I didn't expect them to be first round picks. So I was thinking I was going to have a little bit more, less to play with the running backs that I was looking at here at the end of round 1. But Gibson, Chubb, give me your thoughts there on the start to my draft with Gibson and Chubb. We all know my affinity for Antonio Gibson. This is I want to mention as well, half-point PPR. So it's kind of closer more to that standard scoring type of system than it is a full-point PPR. So that is kind of my thought process going into this draft. I wanted to get some guys that were going to be more heavy on the touchdown potential.
Yeah, you and I discussed this when you went to drafts. I mean, I would say before I get into my assessment of your draft here at the 1-2 turn, I think it's one of those things that the listener should look at this as a really good indication of what your home draft is going to be.
Sure.
Depending on obviously your format, this is a good gauge and a good idea of where some of these guys are going to go and maybe where you can see some value in your home draft. So take a screenshot of it, look at it during your drafts, and this is going to be a good thing for you just to kind of see some value and see what some of these experts are thinking about some of these drafts. I usually, it's not my Bible, but I'm at least seeing some of the value of what's going here and kind of getting a gauge on what I'm going to do in my drafts and using it almost kind of like a mock draft. So with that being said,
which by the way, I'm going to go ahead real quick. I'm going to go ahead and post this to the
I was going to say, yeah, absolutely.
Post the draft board to the Woo_fantasy Twitter account. So if you kind of want to get in there and follow along, I'm going to have that on there here in just a second.
I mean, I don't mind your start. I like Nick Chubb. I like Antonio Gibson. I told you, I think the one player that I think you missed out on that I obviously liked a lot more than you is Jonathan Taylor. I think if you had started this draft off, especially as a half-point PPR, with Jonathan Taylor and Nick Chubb, I would be in love with your start to your draft. That being said, Gibson is not that far off, but I think in this format, I think you had a little bit of a miss on not getting Jonathan Taylor, especially with the news now that Wentz and Quentin Nelson could be back by week 1.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of the only probably going back and looking at things. The only switch that I may have made would probably have been to mix Jonathan Taylor in there, knowing what we know now. But of course, obviously,
sure,
it's hindsight being 2020. But I still feel confident in the 2 backs that I'm starting off with. We're expecting big things out of Gibson this year. Chubb, I mean, let's look at it. Guy goes 12 touchdowns in 12 games last year. You give that man a full slate, this guy's going to be inside the top 5, top 6 at the position, especially in a half-point PPR. So even still, I'm looking at it in terms of potential workload split also. I mean, let's be honest, Jonathan Taylor, we're all expecting big things out of, but how much will he be affected by Naheem Hines? How much will he be affected by Marlon Mack? That remains to be seen.
Sure.
I think
how much does Antonio Gibson get affected by J.D. McKissick?
Yeah, and that's going to be something to watch, because we're seeing a lot of the camp reports indicate that they're using Gibson a lot more in the 2-minute drill in some of the practices. So if he were to take over that workload that McKissick manned last year, when McKissick played 187 snaps and got a lot of that third down work, if you cut that in half and give that to Gibson, my goodness, the potential of Antonio Gibson this year. So I went for, and it's one of those things, and I mentioned it on the broadcast as well, being at that 12 spot, and I'm drafting in a room full of the sharpest minds in the fantasy industry. You have to kind of swing for some players. You have to grab some players that you want, not according to the ADP and who should go there. You want to draft guys that you want on your roster. And that's why I went with Antonio Gibson. And then Chubb, I think that was a splitting hairs decision, because it was between Taylor and Chubb with that pick. And I went with what I assumed to be the better pick with Nick Chubb right now. So kind of going from that, Taylor was the next running back off the board 2 picks later to Jamie Eisenberg, which then followed up. Seeley went with Eckler. Najee Harris went off the board to EY in the second round. And then you had Ridley, Mixon, A.J. Brown, DK Metcalf. Darren Waller goes here right towards the end of round 2, 10th pick in round 2. Then we had Clyde Edwards-Helaire and Justin Jefferson to wrap up round 2 here. So still very running back heavy.
Mm-hmm.
And what I assumed, and this is what I was this was my assumption as I made those first 2 picks, and both were running backs. I wanted to get the strong 1-2 running back start. I assumed that I was going to see a lot more running backs continue to be taken, and was really not the case, because we got into round 3 and we had 6 wide receivers drafted in round 3 ahead of me, but only 3 running backs go off the board in round 3. Really kind of changed my thought process, because I was assuming we would see more running backs continue to go.
I'm sure you're a little upset having that come back to you there. I mean, I know personally, I think that's probably one of the weaknesses of your team is probably the wide receivers there. I definitely am not as big of a fan of some of these guys as you are, but like you said, I mean, you're drafting with some of the best of the best. I'm seeing here. I'm looking down here in round 5. T.J. Hockenson, were you gonna take him with one of those 2 picks?
Yes, that was I got stuck there, because I had Hockenson all queued up, and Schaff right in front of me pulled the Hockenson card on me, and I was like, "You son of a bitch!" And that was the first of 2 times that he hit me in.
Let's see if I can find the other one here. Oh, never mind.
Consecutive picks.
So what, Jerry? No. Mike Williams.
Mike Williams. I was going Mike Williams right there, where I went Jarvis Landry to end up round 7. Landry being my number 3 wide receiver. So if you're following the draft board, the way my roster is constructed here is Gibson, Chubb. I went Robert Woods, Mike Evans, and then Travis Etienne in round 5, Dak Prescott in round 6, Landry, Elijah Moore here in round 8, went Ronald Jones, David Johnson, Irv Smith as my tight end, Russell Gage, the aforementioned Nico Collins, Brashad Perriman, the Washington football team defense, and to end my draft, Trevor Lawrence.
Sunshine with your last pick.
Sunshine with my last pick, yes. More of a grabbing a value at that point in time in the draft. Not many people do take second quarterbacks in these leagues. There was one other team that took a second quarterback in this draft, and it was David Ganos, who went Tom Brady and Jalen Hurts. And the year that I did win this league was I had won when I took Patrick Mahomes with my last pick. So maybe a little bit of kind of reminiscing at that point in time and getting my second quarterback and see how it goes.
This is a very experts draft with obviously I'm assuming anyway there's no trading in this league.
No, there is trading.
Oh,
there is trading.
There you go. Okay. Well,
But that's the thing. Last year, anytime an expert, and that's the thing you run into a lot of these experts leagues, it's very hard to pull off a trade in some of these leagues.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I can imagine barring injuries. And I mean, if you do, it's probably gonna be pretty hard unless Lawrence has a very Justin Herbert-esque kind of a season as he did last year. So, I tell you what, B, I really do like your running backs. I really do like your quarterbacks in this league. I'm not a big fan of your wide receivers or your tight ends. I think you've been very tight end deficient in some of the leagues that you've done so far. I know you got sniped on Hockenson there. That was probably a tough get.
Yeah.
But I love your running backs here, man. I mean, Rojo there, late David Johnson. I mean, I think those are some guys that are gonna, especially with you having Travis Etienne, and him being a little up and down, not knowing necessarily what you're going to get out of him. I think you're going to have some depth there to be able to get to that spot to where he is going to be, there. So, but
yeah, and that's the thing. We kind of lose Nick here for just a second. He bounced out of the room. But what he was talking about, yes, the depth at my running back position, sure. That's kind of a positive that I'm looking to use moving forward, is that depth at the running back position. Hopefully I can use that to my advantage along with the two quarterback usage as well. Maybe I can turn that into a positive and maybe complete a trade in this league and add to my wide receiver. I could. Depends on the start and how Trevor Lawrence goes. I mean, I'm not opposed to trading Dak Prescott to better my roster to make this a title contending team, which if you go through, I know that I think Seeley pulled it up.
Goodness gracious.
Yeah, and that's what I wanted to touch on, because that was that's been a very, very hotly debated topic amongst the fantasy industry experts over the course of the last few days since the draft. You've heard it on Sirius XM and numerous podcasts, as a lot of people have been talking about it. John Daigle starts this draft off with his first 8 picks, wide receivers. You can only start at maximum 5 because of the way flex works. You've got 3 starting wide receiver spots, and then you can use both of your flex positions as wide receivers. So he goes Devontae Adams, Calvin Ridley, Amari Cooper, DJ Moore, Chase Claypool, Odell Beckham, Deebo Samuel, and Marquise Brown as his first 8 picks. And wait, there's more. He goes the very next round. He gets Tyler Higbee in round 9. He does not pull the trigger on a running back until round 10. And then he starts a run of Tony Pollard, Kenyon Drake, and Naheem Hines, and then Damian Williams.
I mean, if you want to get talked about, that's the way to do it, right?
This was, I know he was buying the value. I mean, because I was in the room with the guy and I was kind of hearing a lot of his thought process, but I know he's buying the value that was presented to him in the middle of this draft as the way players were falling to him. I get that. But I think, I'm not here to knock Daigle at all. He's a great guy. I got to know him. We hung out all night Saturday night. He was an awesome guy. But I think he might have. Anybody that's been in a live draft, you kind of sometimes bite into peer pressure. And I think we saw a lot of that with Daigle's draft is as he went 3 deep, 4 deep. At that point, it became is he going to do it again? Hit him again. Hit the wide receiver positioning. Hit it again. And he did, and he would keep doing it. And I think that was a lot of that particular draft for him. And I mean, he's came out on Twitter and he's kind of defended his draft process. And yeah, he's interested to see how this plays out with the players that he has on this roster now. He's definitely a guy that I will target when it comes trade talk time.
I mean, I think this would have been the perfect test for maybe a hero running back strategy. I mean, you go Saquon Barkley there and then go all those receivers. Woo, you got a good team. And then you only need one running back to hit versus needing, I mean, in this format, you need 2 running backs, if not 3, to be able to hit.
And let's compound the problem here. Let's talk about his quarterback, that he didn't grab a quarterback until round 14. He grabs Trey Lance, who may not even be starting
May
week
not
1,
start the whole
2,
year.
3. Yeah, he could. There might be a possibility he does not have a quarterback ready to go week 1. So this is a very, very
Can you pick up anybody before week 1?
Yeah, we're gonna have have a waiver period before week 1.
It's like our league in the head-to-head league that we've done since the late '90s. There, you can't pick up anybody before week 1.
Yeah,
your kicker gets cut, Brandon.
I think that's something that we need to change for sure. I mean,
let's go back to. I think it's a great rule.
Well, let's go back to previous drafts, and it's one we talked about it Saturday night after the draft, where a lot of us were sitting around talking and stuff, and we're leaving the head-to-head league draft one year, a few years back, and I'm driving down the road, bam, Andrew Luck retired right after the draft, and I'm texting everybody, who the hell drafted Andrew Luck? And it was either that same draft or maybe even the year prior. Who was it? It was Lamar Miller blew his ACL right after the draft.
I mean, you were the guy who drafted Chad Pennington, and then he tore his ACL that very same night. So
yeah, he blew it in the preseason game that one as well. So, but I think that reiterates the point. You should have a waiver period depending on how far out you draft. You should.
You know the rules, B.
Anyways, so with Deigle's draft, that has been one that's been talked about ad nauseum over the last few days. It was weird to see it play out. How he was setting up this roster, it's odd. But I think at the end of this draft, a lot of the way people were talking, and then people that were chiming in on Twitter, it seems like myself and Jamie Eisenberg were kind of considered the moving out of the draft favorites heading into the regular season. I might, you might not like my wide receivers that are there with Robert Woods, Mike Evans, Jarvis Landry, Elijah Moore, but I think that there's potential from a week in, week out basis that they're going to score points. That's going to keep me in ball games. This is a completely different feel from my draft in this same league last year, where I was drafting from the 2 spot, where I had Saquon Barkley, and then I went very wide receiver centric right after that, when I had a lot of those guys that I took in the rounds, progressing after that point. That was the injury ravaged team. If you follow me on Twitter, you kind of kept up it with last year. I was down 4 of my first 5 draft picks after the first month of the season. I was definitely ravaged at that point in time, but I've a little bit different strategy with this team here. And like I said on in the broadcast, and when I was interviewed, you do have to make some reaches at the end of a round. You want to go after guys that you consider to be your guys, and I have to kind of keep putting that out there to you. So if you're drafting at the spot 1, spot 2 in your drafts, or if you're drafting at 11, 12 in your drafts, kind of keep that mindset. Don't just kind of try to follow along that same timeline of, I need to get this guy because the ADP says he drafts here.
Right.
Nah, go get your guy. If you want this player, but you don't think that he's going to be there, or you don't want to draft him because he should be drafted towards the end of the next round, go ahead and get him. I mean, if you're high on the player, go ahead and get him.
Especially at your spot. Yeah, I mean, you've got to start the trends, not follow up.
Exactly. And then what you mentioned
at that turn.
I mean, Hawkinson, that was going to be my tight end.
I knew when I saw it there.
Yeah, when I missed out on Hawkinson, that obviously puts me in a spot to where that tier broke, and I'm more comfortable taking players that are a little bit further down the board as I fill in my roster at other positions. And Elijah Moore, I mentioned that on the broadcast. He's a guy that I'm very, very high on, and I wanted to make sure I grabbed him in the spot that I did to start off round 8, because he would not have made it back to me in round 9. No, not in that room. Yeah, he would have had to have passed all the way through 8 and come back through round 9, and in that room, he would not have made it back to me. He would have been. Well, you have to look. He would have been selected. I'm sure he would have been selected ahead of Jalen Waddle, Devontae Parker, Darnell Mooney, Marvin Jones.
Really? I don't know. Maybe
I truly believe. Yes.
Maybe it's me. I definitely do not have Elijah Moore as high as you do, anywhere close to as high as you do. So I know you're on him, and granted, get your guy, but yeah, I definitely have him nowhere close to that high. Let's see my wide receiver list. Let's see. Hold on, let me go down the list here. Let's see, where's he at? There's Jalen Waddle at 64. Elijah Moore 67 is where I have him on my list there. So, but you definitely have him higher. And hey, like you said, if you believe in him that much, he's gonna be ranked that high. Like I said, I would have thought you could have gotten him back, where you pick. But I mean, let's face it, who the hell are you gonna get if you don't? I mean, if you think if that's your guy at wide receiver, I mean, what other running back or tight end or whatever are you gonna go with there?
Well, based on the picks that were made after that, I likely would have probably gone with either Tyler Boyd or Michael Gallup in that spot. Those were the other two names that I was looking at on my list. But again, like I said, that's a move that I made. That's a swing, and hopefully it pays out. He's my wide receiver 4. There's a good chance that he's going to progress and be a guy that I'm going to be starting at some point, probably by middle of the season, as a weekly starter. If things progress, I mean, let's be honest. The guy has been an absolute superstar. Coin the Twitter handle in training camp so far. You're hearing news
a real life superstar.
Yes,
you're the real life superstar.
I'm the Roto superstar. So, but no, he's the camp king right now in New York. He's making plays daily.
What was his name? Billy Davis. Wasn't that the Cowboys camp?
Well, no, he was the one preseason game star. He was the one preseason game star against the Baltimore Ravens that year. Had a great 2-touchdown game, and then everyone was all over him. But yeah, nothing after that point in time. So overall, yeah, I'm pleased with what I put together with this roster. I think we're going to have a good, solid squad moving forward. Like I mentioned, there's some pieces that I can use to maybe move potential trades, bolster this roster as things kind of go down through the next few weeks, and as we get into the regular season, I'm expecting this team to be a title contender. But by the way, we're gonna go and kind of move on into tight end talk, and while we do that, I will kind of start off the discussion here, Nick, if you want to. I know Nick's needing to take a potty break. Yeah, be right back. He's going to take a potty break. But we want to transition into. We're going to talk about the tight ends here real quick, and preface this by saying we all know where tight end ends and begins, whether you want to look at it or not. Travis Kelce obviously is the bona fide tight end 1. No ifs, ands, or buts at that point in time. Nobody can disagree with that. He's been the guy that has led this position for numerous years in a row, and we don't see that changing over the course of the next few weeks. I think he's going to be the guy, whether you look at it from a dynasty standpoint or redraft, season-long league. You're going to see Kelce coming off the board this year in round 1. This is probably the first time that I can remember in recent seasons that we're going to see a tight end drafted in the first round consistently, amongst all drafts. As it's kind of a new thing. Yeah, a lot of people are wanting to buy in on Travis Kelce and get that guy that's the uber talent at the position that gives you that edge from a starting roster standpoint, week in and week out. So Travis Kelce, like I mentioned, is the end-all be-all at the position right now. But then as we get into the rest of the position, I mentioned we're talking. We started it off. Travis Kelce, Nick, obviously tight end 1. There's no room for debate there. Nobody's even questioning that. We're moving forward at that point in time with Travis Kelce. Now everyone is kind of seems like we've got Darren Waller at number 2, but there's a weird situation going on with Darren Waller right now. He's not been in practice for over a week now at Raiders camp. And
I'm not worried about it.
It's not a situation to really be worried about, but they're being very secretive about the situation. They don't want to disclose if it's an injury. Who knows? Maybe it's just they're kind of similar situation with Dak, and they're kind of resting him. They know there's no point in putting him through all these extra reps because they know what they've got in him. There's no point in kind of burning him out before the regular season starts. So Kelce, Waller, 1-2 at the position. I don't think we can debate that whatsoever, because if you go look at their stats last year, Kelce had 6 100-yard games last year. Waller had 5 100-yard games. Kelce with 11 touchdowns, Waller with 9 touchdowns. They were the only 2 tight ends at the position to go over 1,000 yards, and the only 2 tight ends to go over 100 catches as well. They're the alphas at this position. We don't have any room for debate there. But after that, that's where we kind of start getting in a little bit of discussion. Most people are going to have George Kittle there. I'm one of them at tight end 3.
I'm one as well.
And then you're going to kind of mix
especially
things
Jimmy
up.
Garoppolo. Yeah, I mean, I think you got to have him. Got to have him as your 3 there. There are some other options there at receiver, but I think it's a pretty easy slot in with him at 3.
Yes, I will agree with that. He seems to be if he stays healthy, there's a good chance that he's going to finish. He could finish as the tight end 1. He might surpass Kelce. Who's to say? It's just a matter of him staying healthy and staying on the field. He could surpass Darren Waller. Who's to say? But after that, that's where you start kind of getting into a little bit of differences with a lot of rankings and things that are out there. I've got Pitts at 4, followed by Hockenson and Andrews. How do you have yours sorted out after those?
Are you looking at my board? No, I have it the exact same way. I really view Kelce and Waller as a tier unto themselves at 1-2. To me, Kittle is a tier unto himself at tier 2. And then I think you have Pitts, Hawk, and Andrews as kind of that tier 3 for me. So the only reason that I rank Pitts a little bit ahead of Andrews and Hockenson is just because Matt Ryan loves throwing the tight ends, and I think he's going to be that number 2 guy there. I think he's going to take a lot of those Julio Jones catches, and especially see a lot of action in the red zone, quite frankly. So, and then I really like Mark Andrews, but I like Hockenson a lot more. I think Hawk is going to be that option that Jared Goff is going to be looking to early and often in that offense. So, really for me, the top 6 are a tier really into themselves. But I think when you break it down, those are easily my top 6. And you know, based on last year's guys, I mean, you had a lot of fluctuation outside of this top grouping. If you did not have one of these guys, you by and large are not doing well in your leagues last year.
Yeah, and I think if you look at it, the way the drafts are kind of going to unfold is you're going to see one tight end drafted in every round for the first 6 rounds, and it's going to be these 6 names is how I think things are going to shake out. You're going to see Kelce, Waller, Kittle, and then whatever other way you want to put the next 3, whether it's Pitts, Andrews, Hockenson, or Hockenson, Pitts, Andrews, or however you want to draft them. I think it's going to be 1 per round for the first 6 rounds is how you're going to see them come off the board. Then the tier break, like we've talked about. I think that's where you've got this clear line of delineation, and boom. After that, it's kind of Katie bar the door, because you can really draft the rest of these guys in any form or fashion, how you want to shake them out. There's so many inconsistencies and red flags with these guys. Moving down the board after that. But for me, rounding out the top 10, the way that I've got them set right now, I've got Robert Tonyan at 7. I've got Noah Fant at 8. Irv Smith Jr. at 9. Dallas Goedert right now entrenched as my tight end 10. Is how I've got them. How's your board looking with the remainder of these tight ends here? And do you favor any of these guys in drafts right now?
At least so far, I've gotten one of these top 6 in my drafts so far. So I haven't had to dip into this next little second tier of tight ends. So for me right now, my board shakes up just a little bit differently. I have Dallas Goedert as my number 7, Logan Thomas as 8. I've got Noah Fant 9 and Robert Tonyan at 10. is my ranking there. I think Logan Thomas for me, I think is in a great situation. You get a guy in Fitzpatrick that really likes to throw the tight end. You saw what he did with Mike Gesicki here over the last couple of years. So I think Logan Thomas builds on the year he had. But Dallas Goedert even getting to him at 7. Zach Ertz is back, but look at the receiving options that they have there. You do have Smith that's coming in, but he's a rookie, so I think Jalen Hurts comes in and is wanting to throw the ball to somebody he knows and trusts, and I think a healthy Dallas Goedert is somebody there that I think kind of leads for me that next tier.
Yeah, and you're hearing a lot of the camp reports and the buzz coming out of Philadelphia right now is that Hurts is targeting Goddard and Ertz a ton in practices right now. Now, obviously,
this could be a Patriots offense.
And you got Devontae Smith that's missing time. He's not on the field. Jalen Reagor, of course, they're trying to really kind of get him more acclimated and feel comfortable because of the bad year that he had the rookie year last year. And then outside of that, let's just call it what it is a dumpster fire at receiver for the Eagles outside of those players.
Has Alshon Jeffrey signed anywhere? Is he still
a free agent? He's
a free agent.
Is he alive? I think that's going to be one of those Demaryius Thomas forced retirements for Alshon Jeffrey where just nobody's going to touch him and he's just going to say, I guess I retire. I mean, that's what it's going to wind up being there with him. But yeah, you're hearing a lot of good information with Goddard and Ertz right now. And that's the shocking thing is we still see Ertz as an Eagle. He comes into camp looking like Eminem with the bleach blonde hair. so maybe new year, new Ertz. Who knows? Maybe he's just trying to change an attitude. Kind of just start fresh. I mean, maybe last year for Ertz was an outlier. Maybe he was banged up a lot more than we want to let on. Who knows? And if they do run a lot of 12 personnel, which could be the case in Atlanta too with Pitts and Hayden Hurst. And I think a lot of people are kind of really discounting that fact, and we're really buying into Pitts being this just alpha that's going to take over for Julio in the offense. And I expect that to be the case, overall by the season's end. But I think you're going to see that a lot with both Philadelphia with Ertz and Goddard. I think they're going to siphon off of each other, and it's really going to be hard to count on both of these guys consistently. And that's my red flag with Goddard, and that's why I'm not really fully entrenched on him currently. And it's the same situation you're going to look at with New England, with both Jonnu Smith and Hunter Henry, as we you look further down the board at that position. Not a lot of people are really buying in with either one of the Patriots tight end, whether that's, we want to call that a criminalization with Cam Newton and where you just don't really feel great about Cam coming into the season as a quarterback moving forward, maybe. But, Jonnu Smith, Hunter Henry are both solid tight ends that could produce fantasy numbers, but there's just not a lot of excitement there. And it's the same situation, I think, with Philadelphia. You've got two seemingly really good players that are, I think, going to affect the production of each other consistently.
I think with Dallas Goedert, it's one of those things where, you've had those guys in that offense and you have what seems to be a little bit of consistency where, I think in New England, obviously Hunter Henry, Jonnu Smith are both new. I firmly believe that Cam Newton will not be the starting quarterback at the halfway mark of the season. I think it's going to be Mac Jones.
Mr. Number 50, Mac Jones.
Yeah.
Wearing number 50 as a quarterback.
What was that Rob Ninkovich or was that 51? I can't remember. It was something to that effect. But
yeah, something to that effect. Yeah.
Let's talk one guy real quick who you and I have a very different take on. Is Irv Smith. Irv Smith. You seemingly have Irv Smith coming right in and assuming that role that he's going to be the top tight end and he is in that offense. I have him as my tight end number 20. I think only because I see him as the third. I see him as the third option in that offense. And you have him inside your top 10. So talk about why you have him that high.
Now, I think it's going to be more from a standpoint of touchdown potential. He's not going to be a tight end that's going to come out there and give you 6-7 catches a week consistently. That's not going to be the case. That's not what Irv Smith is going to do well for you as your tight end one in your offense. But what you're seeing in camp right now is he's getting a ton of work as the red zone option, fades in the end zone, a lot of out routes to the pylon, things like that. They're working on things like that to get him the ball in the end zone as a red zone threat. And that was something that Adam Thielen did a ton of last year. I think he was third in the league in red zone targets, winds up getting 13 touchdowns last year. And that was the big appeal for Adam Thielen. I don't think that's going to be repeated. I think a lot of that work is going to siphon over to Irv Smith. They're going to have certain packages to get him the ball in the red zone and in end zone formations. So he's going to be a guy that I think can get in that 8 touchdown range. And if he gets anywhere 6 to 9 touchdowns scored, that's a tight end 10.
Year.
That's a big year. He's going to be he's top 10 easily at that point in time. And he's a guy based on, like, you mentioned he's further down your board, but he's a guy that I'm targeting a lot in these drafts if I'm missing that first tier of those tight ends. If I'm not getting these first top 5 guys, 6 with Andrews kind of mixed in as well, I will wait 4 or 5 rounds and I will get an Irv Smith and I will feel great about it. And that's how I'm looking at him.
I can definitely see where you're coming from. I would say, obviously the top 6 is where I would go, that I would feel very comfortable starting any of those guys week in, week out.
Yeah.
That I think for me, this 7 to 10 range is somewhere where I feel very good about starting these guys week in, week out. But any of these guys, especially, for me, if I was like you and got an Irv Smith, I really want to almost go back to back with tight ends just to make sure and try to hit on one of these guys week in, week out. So
I will say this too, just to kind of jump in. The only reason I did not jump back into the tight end position is because of the limited roster spots in the flex league with only 16. 16 roster spots are a little bit more limited. You say you go 20 round draft, I'm getting 2 easily. So that I do wanted to point that out. Yeah, I would have jumped back in if we had a couple extra roster spots in that league.
Sure. I think one name that's very intriguing, I think we need to touch on before we go kind of in this next set, who came out of pretty much nowhere. We talked about him a little bit last year, but Robert Tonyan. I think I had way down my board whenever the Aaron Rodgers talk was going on there, because I would not have expected him to do very well, but the touchdowns and the kind of games that he had last year, I mean, he had some very nice games and definitely won people some leagues. So talk a little bit about Robert Tonyan, why you have him at 10.
It's just it's the same thing with, the way I talked about with Irv Smith, the touchdown potential. Tonyan goes for 11 touchdowns last year on 52 catches, only 586 yards receiving on the year. Let's say we have some touchdown regression in 2021. Let's call a spade a spade. But let's say he drops back to 7 instead of 11. He's still a starting tight end week in, a week out. I think a lot of the indications are, some people are thinking, hey, they're bringing in Randall Cobb. He's going to take a lot of the workload. I don't buy into that. We're seeing odd formations with Amari Rodgers in the backfield for the Packers in camp right now. But we're hearing glowing reports over the course of the last week that Tonyan, if it touches his hand, it's a catch. And that's what you want out of a tight end. And that's a guy that's going to get Aaron Rodgers' confidence every single time he steps back to throw the ball. Is a guy that he knows it's going to go in his hands. He's going to catch the ball. He's not going to drop it. So that's why I'm buying in. I'm still kind of on board with Robert Tonyan in 2021, because I think that rapport is going to be there, and you're not going to be losing anything between Rodgers to Tonyan. If there is that touchdown regression, it's not going to be by much. We're not talking this guy's going to drop down to 4 receptions and touchdowns on the year in 2021. It's just not going to happen. He's going to still be a viable threat to score week in and week out, and a guy that you can count on as a tight end 1.
All right, and I think that's why I look at him a little bit higher than I do some of these other guys. Is like a Logan Thomas, is I see them as the number 2 option, where I see Irv Smith as the number 3 option in that offense. I think that's why I have Robert Tonyan as high as I do. Is I think you're going to have a lot of inconsistencies from some of those other backup number 2 receivers for Green Bay. Whereas Robert Tonyan, we've seen what he did last year. So let's get into that next. Let's get into that next little subset of tight ends. I have what I found to be, at least for the 2 drafts that I've done so far, and I've got him as my backup tight end in both leagues that I've done so far. At 11, I've got Rob Gronkowski. 12, I've got Tyler Higbee, Hunter Henry, Mike Gesicki, Jared Cook, who finds himself in a nice situation. There were the Chargers, and then my number 16 guy, who I'm looking to have a little bit of a rebound year this year, Austin Hooper. So talk about some of those guys. Talk about who you have kind of coming up right in that next little slot of receivers, kind of ending tight end 1, beginning of tight end 2s.
Which is odd too, because I've got Higbee and Gesicki, I think, exactly in the same spot you do at 12 and 14.
Okay.
So,
well, I get to flip the script on you finally.
Yeah. So Higbee, I think it speaks for itself. The quarterback that he's got in tow, Matthew Stafford, has been a guy that's consistently targeted the tight end year in and year out. He basically made Hawkinson the player that he is at this point in time now.
And let's not forget Gerald Everett is bye-bye.
Yeah, and so, I mean, Higbee's going to be a guy that you can watch for that's going to be a strong candidate. But I do want to, I mean, I'm going to point him out as a sleeper and a guy that if you're in a deep draft, like a 22 round draft, if you want to really dive deep, but it's more of kind of a dynasty pool, Jacob Harris. Jacob Harris is a guy that's kind of making waves in Rams camp right now too. And he might wind up kind of getting some snaps and pulling away from Higbee some. So he's kind of a deep name that you want to keep in the back of your mind in a lot of these deeper drafts, but especially in dynasty leagues. You want to probably you might want to save a spot on that roster at some point in time for a Jacob Harris. But Higbee, like I mentioned, all quarterback play. I think Matt Stafford is going to be a guy that he's going to use Higbee all over the field, especially over the middle of the field. But the reason I've got him at 12 and I've kind of wavered with where I want to rank him is because what you mentioned, your kind of drawback with Irv Smith is just his hierarchy in this passing receiver rotation. I mean, you've got Cooper Kupp, you've got Robert Woods. I mean, there's guys that are going to be catching the ball like crazy in that Rams offense. Deshaun Jackson, a guy that's, while he's healthy, is probably going to be a name to monitor. There's too many mouths to feed, and that's going to be the knock on these guys as we kind of you look down this board. Red flags as far as inconsistencies, and that's just been the same thing year in and year out with this tight end position.
Yeah, and to your point, I think if you don't get one of the top 6 guys, and granted, even if you do, just with the way that the tight end position performed last year and how wildly inconsistent it was, I think you don't do yourself any justice if you don't select 2 and maybe if not 3 tight ends, depending on the number of flex spots you have. I think where you and I gain a little bit of additional insight on tight ends at the flex position. You and I have the league that we've done Cincinnati, as we were talking about a little bit earlier, combines the wide receiver and tight end position. And if you go back and look at those guys and comparing the wide receivers and who you would take, a lot of those tight ends are outranking a lot of wide receiver names that you would find to be a little bit higher, you would think. Yeah. But the tight end guys are outperforming them, mainly because it's a lot of touchdowns.
But it's all I was going to say. Yeah, the touchdowns are really heavily considered in that league. There's not a PPR format; it's a standard scoring league. So the tight ends is from a scoring point standpoint, they get in the end zone as much as some of those guys at receiver in that 25 to 50 range. So you see a lot of mix in with those players there. So I agree. But Mike Gesicki and Austin Hooper, the other 2 names that you mentioned, there's upside there, sure. Hooper, I think he's prime candidate for a bounce back year. I agree with you there. I think second year in that system with Stefanski and Baker, I think there's going to be a little bit more uptick as far as what they can do from a passing standpoint. And Hooper, as long as he can stay healthy, I think he's going to be a guy that you can. He's going to definitely be a matchup play tight end. And we keep mentioning it. Outside that top 6, you get into a lot of these guys. If you draft 2 at this position, these are going to be guys that you're going to play. You're going to kind of play week in and week out, looking at matchups. They're not going to be bona fide starters for you in your weekly starting lineup consistently. They're going to kind of change in and out based on how they're performing and the matchups that are ahead of them.
So let's go to that next set, or maybe even somebody that we just mentioned. Give me a name or two that you're thinking. Oh,
yeah, that's what I was going to touch on real quick. Was that you're kind of getting into some of these guys that are high upside guys that are sleeper type potential tight ends this year. Adam Troutman is one of them. A lot of people are excited about him taking over that New Orleans Saints tight end position. But let's be honest, that has all to do with who's the quarterback for the New Orleans Saints. Mm-hmm. If it's Taysom Hill, I'm out on Troutman. If it's Jameis Winston, I'm buying in on Troutman. I'm going to be higher on him. I've got Troutman right now at 11 in my rankings, and that's with me kind of having a gut feeling that it's going to be Jameis as the quarterback right now. But then outside of that, you get into some of these other guys that there's expected to be an uptick in their workload. Anthony Firkser with the Titans, with Jonnu Smith gone. There's some excitement with him that he's going to take over that role and be a touchdown threat in this offense that's going to be kind of a red zone, kind of that goal line formation type of guy. He's not going to be the guy that's going to, I mean, let's be honest. It's the A.J. Brown Julio show on the outside. There's really not going to be that consistency from a target work point for a Firkser, but
I'm going to disagree.
He might give you that five. He might give you 5 looks a game. But it's going to be, he might one week give you 8 or 9, but then the next week he could give you 3.
I agree. It's going to be very inconsistent, but look at the work that Jonnu Smith got, and even the work that Firkser got when Jonnu was out. Firkser on a DFS standpoint was amazing last year in those weeks that Jonnu Smith missed. For all the stuff that Ryan Tannehill does.
Look at it last year. Jonnu Smith, 8 touchdowns last year on 41 receptions. Was he a guy that you were feeling great about starting week in and week out? No. I had him in a couple of leagues, and I wasn't feeling great. But he scored 8 touchdowns.
But Tannehill is one of those guys that he throws the tight end, he mixes the ball around a little bit. So Firkser is a guy that I would love as my tight end too if I'm taking him a little bit late. There's 2 names that I'm going to throw out that are getting taken a little bit later. I haven't done this since we've gone through positionals, but I'm going Homer. I didn't really like him.
I was waiting for that.
I didn't really like him when they drafted him, but the way things are going here, I kind of like Cole Kmet.
Yeah, you should.
I have him as my number 22 guy right now. I mean, he's a little bit down
20 for me.
Okay, ooh, look at that. You even have him higher than I do, and I'm talking about him. I
wanted to find ways to move him up higher on my board too.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's a guy that is going to come in there, and I think just like we talked last week, there's a spot for Darnell Mooney. I think he has a really high ceiling, but I think on a week in, week out standpoint, you're not going to have the touchdowns that I think Cole Kmet's going to have in this offense compared to the catches that Darnell Mooney is going to have in this offense. So I think Cole Kmet is somebody that I would want to kind of see what's going on, It bears to be seen. I don't like it just from the amount of receivers that are in this offense. But I think Evan Ingram is somebody who had 109 targets last year. Granted, he only had catches in the 60s, but I think he's one of those guys that, he is getting drafted so much further. He's in a contract year. You're hopefully seeing a healthy Evan Ingram. You're hopefully seeing a healthy Daniel Jones. Evan Ingram could be that guy that finally in the last year of his deal could finally realize what his potential is. But I think he's a guy that, I have him as my tight end number 18. Could see a little value there.
Yeah, I'll say this about Evan Ingram. Last year had to have been a concentration issue. He had 8 drops, 61.8 catch percentage last year, which is not good whatsoever. A lot of that was on Daniel Jones, the inconsistency that Daniel Jones shown last year as well. So for me, I'm out on Evan Ingram. That, and you couple in the fact of the injury history with Evan Ingram, he's kind of hard to really count on consistently, but he's definitely a guy. you can draft later on currently. I think you're going to see him go earlier in a lot of kind of casual league drafts because the value of Evan Ingram lies more in name than actual production. So I think a lot of people
60 catches though last year,
60 catches, but let's look last year. What did they have?
Not a whole lot.
Not a lot. They bring in Kenny Galladay.
Right.
They draft Kadarius Toney. Sterling Shepard's back and healthy. Let's not forget about Darius Slayton. I mean, added John
his main
Ross
competition too. Got kicked out because he was stealing food. So
that's true, but then also let's go back to the beginning of the show. Saquon Barkley's back. And those were vacated targets last year with Saquon Barkley on the sideline with the torn ACL that are now going to go back to Barkley and away from Evan Ingram. So that's for me kind of I'll let someone else deal with that headache situation. But to tie back into Cole Kmet, where you mentioned that, like if you look back to last year where he really kind of started to find his way down the end of the stretch last year, he had at least four out of his last 5 games he was targeted 6 or more times.
Mm-hmm.
So they've started
coming in with a different quarterback, but the target
coming in with a different quarterback
was absolutely there. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so the work was there, the workload was there for him, and I think that's going to be something they're going to rely on him a little bit more this year as well. So I do buy into that as also. Now one big question mark for me at this position, and it's one I'm kind of scratching my head on still currently, is the Cowboys tight end situation.
I knew you were going to bring that up.
I got to. Because Dalton Schultz was an amazing find last year on the waiver wire and went undrafted, but turned in an awesome season. He was a guy that you could start with confidence on a week-in, week-out basis. Guy goes 85 targets, 63 catches, 4 touchdowns, finishes tight end 10 last year. But now you have Blake Jarwin coming back from the injury, and that's the guy that they put the money towards. So all indications right now is that they're probably going to split a little bit of workload between the two. Dalton Schultz had a little bit of an ankle injury in camp today, so that's something to monitor.
Yeah.
So moving forward, kind of keep an eye on that. But I cannot, for the life of me, grasp the situation between these two, because if you made them into one specific person, like last year with Dalton Schultz was the tight end. He's a definite guy that's inside the top 10 of my rankings. But now you're splitting the situation between the two of them, and you don't know how the volume is going to be split and the workload is going to be split between the two of them. So now I'm out. I've got them both like back to back right now in my rankings at 21 and 22.
Wow, that's pretty high though, B. I mean, for splitting rankings 21, 22, that's really high.
It's still high but I think that there's going to be separate value with both players, but not consistently. And that's the key word we're using with this position: consistency.
Yeah, I for me, I've got Blake Jarwin at 26, and I've got Schultz at 37 in my tight end rankings. But we both know how high you have your boy Dak Prescott ranked here too. So you probably have him with 97 touchdowns. So we're gonna have a lot of guys, get some action.
Dak's throwing for 40 this year. Let's go ahead and get that out of the way. He's throwing for 40 in a 17 game slate. He's throwing for 40.
I agree with you. I told you
those touchdowns are going somewhere. I mean, let's say you give both Cooper. Let's say Cooper and Lamb both get 10, and then we give Gallup 6. That's 26 out of 40. Those other touchdowns are going somewhere.
I think Zeke gets 3 to 4. I think Pollard gets 3 to 4.
That's another 8. That's a 34.
Let's just throw a minimum of 3 apiece for Schultz and Jarwin. There's your 40 right there.
Yeah, and if you say both get 3 to 4 touchdowns each, they're both inside the top 20.
And if you
because of the nature of this position, because of the nature of this position, let me go down to last year. Dallas Goedert finishes at tight end 20 last year on 11 games played with 3 touchdowns and 524 yards.
But we had a lot of injuries in this position last year, B. We had a lot.
There were some guys
Jack
that have
Doyle
missed
had
some games.
23 receptions and 3 touchdowns last year.
Sure.
Which,
Yeah,
by the way, was probably one of my worst calls last year. I had no idea Mo Alley Cox would do what the hell
but
he
you've
did.
been long since been a guy that's been high on a Jack Doyle, and I've just maybe he's just a Jag, but
well, but my if you similar to what you said about the Cowboys position, I mean, if you look at what Phillip Rivers did with that tight end spot last year, I was right. We just had a lot more separation. I mean, you had Mo Alley Cox come in there and get some things done. You had Jack Doyle come in there and get some things done as well. So I mean the touchdowns were there. Trey Burton came in. I started Trey Burton in DFS in some leagues, in some weekly leagues last year. He was killing it. So if you combine those guys into a tight end, they had a really good top 10 year, but there was a lot of spread out work. So I know we're getting down toward the end. Who's some guys that you're not on?
Whoo, man, guys that I'm not on. I'm not as high as a lot of other people in the industry on Gerald Everett. I've got him in 19. I've seen his name kind of move up the board in a lot of situations because of Seattle kind of being a place where they do like the tight end. They've talked him up in preseason, training camp news and off-season OTAs. Gerald Everett's been a name that they've kind of put some shine on. I'm not going to buy into it yet because, I mean, there's the same situation. I can't see from a consistency factor that he's a guy that's going to give you production on a week in, week out basis that you can count on. Not with Tyler Lockett, not with DK Metcalf there. I mean, let's be honest. Will Dissly's still there, and that's a guy that Russell Wilson's he's definitely been a fan of over the last couple of years when healthy. He's targeted him on several occasions as well. But then outside of that, I'm kind of, like I did mention, I'm kind of avoiding the Patriots tight end situation. I don't really have a good grasp on that, so I'm avoiding them also. You mentioned Jared Cook, but I'm a little bit lower on Jared Cook. I'm kind of out on him because I think you're going to see more of an emergence from Donald Parham as opposed to Jared Cook. I think you're going to see the more athletic, younger tight end take more of a grasp of that role than the old vet Antonio Gates light Jared Cook. The guy that's been around. He's a little long in the tooth at this point in time in his career. Now, we just heard a little. I read a report a couple of days ago that they wanted to find more ways to involve Donald Parham this year. And I had Parham a little bit higher on my board prior to that. So that gives me a little bit more, confidence in what they're going to do with that rotation. But again, I'm probably not drafting either one of those two, because if we're getting this far down at the position at tight end in these rankings, there's only one name that I'm going to probably draft. If you're this far down the board and you're this late in your draft and you're going to grab a guy, I'm grabbing Dan Arnold. Dan Arnold, you heard it correctly. Yes. There's a growing, blooming connection between he and Sam Darnold in Carolina right now.
Let the double chin come out.
I think that's a situation where if you're going to go this long into your draft, and if you want to double dip into the position and you've got a guy that's in that first 5, 6, 7, but you want to double dip in the position, I think Dan Arnold's a guy you can grab really late and have on your roster and kind of see how things unfold. But for me, I mean, he's definitely a guy that I'm going to grab late in most of my formats. I'm going to pair with an Irv Smith, or I can pair with a Dallas Goedert. Yeah, I think there's something there with Dan Arnold moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, we all heard, for me, we heard all the Dan Arnold rumors last year with Kyler Murray with a really good quarterback. But you want me to believe that stuff with Sam Darnold and the receivers they have there?
It's the nature of the offense and what they're going to do with how their quarterback plays. Kyler Murray is not really a guy that the way the Cliff Kingsbury offense runs, that they target the tight end very much. They run a lot of that 3 wide receiver set. They're more focused on the outside, kind of more down the field. So Dan Arnold wasn't really a scheme fit for Kingsbury in that offense. But I think what they're trying to do in Carolina with that offense, I think it's going to be a little bit more traditional. And I think it fits to more what Dan Arnold can do. And like I said, there's been glowing reports in camp. I would throw a dart late in the draft board for a name like that than I would grabbing a guy like, then I'm going to grab Jared Cook or I'm going to grab a Hayden
Really,
Hurst.
though?
Yes.
Really?
Yes, without a doubt.
I'm gonna go ahead and disagree with you there.
Well, you can disagree all you want to.
I do. I do. I'm gonna go for another name a little deeper down the board there. On mine. I mean, I think this is one of those guys who he was a higher draft pick. He was somebody that's been talked about for a little bit. This offense has lost one of its top receiving options. So I'm seeing this guy, if I wait a little bit longer at getting that tight end too, Dawson Knox is somebody who's a little bit down the board, who they lost John Brown. Cole Beasley may develop COVID on a weekly basis here at this rate. So
yeah,
we do have Emmanuel Sanders who is getting a little long in the tooth to use your description there, but Dawson Knox is one of those guys that I think is kind of more of an up and comer. I do, unfortunately for Dawson Knox, see this as a situation that if one of these tight end heavy teams decide to trade somebody off, I think the landing spot could be Buffalo. But if Dawson Knox, if they don't bring anybody in, I think this is a great spot for him to really show some value late in drafts.
And I would actually piggyback off of that and say keep an eye on Jacob Hollister in Buffalo. I think that's kind of the same situation with Jared Cook and Donald Parham with the Chargers. I think that you might see Hollister kind of mix in a little bit more than we're expecting in that offense. Dawson Knox has been inconsistent. That's been the key phrase that we've been using for this position. I'm gonna jump. Dawson Knox is more of a DFS play for me than he is a guy that I'm going to roster in a season-long format.
How many tight ends do you have ranked? Like 72?
Oh, man, I've got tons of tight ends ranked. Let's be honest here. But as he says that, he ducks out of the room. But before we get him back on, yeah, I want to touch on one more name, and it's been the guy – I was about to touch on one more name before we finish this up, and it's been the guy that has been expected over the last few years, and he still's not rounded into shape, and that's Chris Herndon in New York with the Jets. He's actually not even starting on their depth chart right now. It's Tyler Kroft ahead of him on the depth chart, so kind of keep that in mind. You're going to see that. You're going to see that if you're a casual drafter. You're doing like a 10, 12 team league with your buddies and kind of your home league. If you do like on an ESPN league or something like that, you're going to see Chris Herndon higher in their database because of name value, but he's not starting. That's actually Tyler Kroft. But then, like I mentioned, we're this far down the board. I'm going to probably grab a guy like a Jacob Harris and have him, that last roster spot on my team and kind of let things play, see how he fixates into that offense with the Rams. So they're just kind of circle back to everything with this position. Top 5, 6 off the board. Those are the guys you really want to target if it makes sense to you in your draft to pull the trigger that early. And if that's how you want to build your roster was with one of these top 5 to 6. Outside of that, I cannot reiterate it enough. Just wait because there's so many of these guys. We've just mentioned it. You want to double dip at the position and you want to grab some depth, and you're going to want to play the matchups between some of these players further down the board because there's so much as far as inconsistencies with these players.
Yeah, and I mean, I would challenge you to go get one of those top 6 guys. The value, I think, from some of the depth at wide receiver, if you get one of those top 6 guys, I think you can really build a solid squad. versus you having to take a tight end a little bit higher than a number 2 tight end anyway, a little bit higher than you otherwise would. To where if you get one of those top 6 guys, you can kind of wait a little bit longer to grab one of those high upside guys a little bit later. So,
yeah, I think that's kind of the overwhelming fact that we'll point out to everyone as you kind of prepare for your drafts and you're looking at the tight end position. We've mentioned it with the positions that we've done in previous podcasts. Wide receiver is so deep this year that you can grab one of those top 5, 6 guys in the first 6 rounds, and you can still build a quality roster with wide receivers that you kind of wait on, because the way that things can build, depending on where you're drafting, in the middle or the late, it doesn't matter where you're at. You can grab one of those top 5, 6 guys and then round out your roster in those middle to late rounds with some of these later wide receivers. But yeah, I think the key in 2021 is going to be grabbing one of those top 5, 6 guys at this position. I think it's going to give you a better roster, a more competitive roster, based on how you build things. Like we've mentioned on this podcast ad nauseum, filling out that depth at running back early, grabbing a solid quarterback for your roster, and getting one of these top tier tight ends, I think is the way to go in 2021.
Agreed.
There you go. So we'll wrap things up.
We're coming back. Our next episode is going to be on the kickers.
Shit. That will be a one-man podcast ran by the GOAT, Nick Heffley.
I'm happy to do it. Just set me up.
Breaking down the kickers.
We'll talk about it. Yeah, we'll absolutely break down the kickers.
But no, the next time we join you will be our yearly trek to Bowling Green, Kentucky for the weekend of SBFFC festivities.
We're going to have a lot of content coming at you.
Sure. We've got Friday night drafts that are sponsored by this podcast, Woo Fantasy. We'll have those going on Friday night. So we'll probably do something kind of short and sweet after the fact.
You got
Friday
that right.
Night and break things down. Nice segue into Dr. Harwood there. But then also the main event on Saturday. And then also the Sunday drafts that are always full of fun as well, that we do with our home leagues. Also in the Dynasty League draft, that's always the same weekend.
But don't forget the Dynasty League. We moved last year.
Oh yeah, that's right. That's
on a Tuesday. Yeah. We're doing it on a separate date to give it its own special date.
I'd forgotten about that. We did that via Zoom last year, and it was kind of a hit last year. So yeah, no,
we did. We're bringing it back.
Gotcha. So that's going to be what we're looking at next week. Kind of coverage from Bowling Green, Kentucky, and kind of bring you the life of high stakes drafting. That is next week on this podcast. So be ready to catch us then and join us then as well. But until then, as always, sponsors of the show, rotoballer.com. Definitely go on there. Premium content, best that you can find out there. Any sport that you can think of, we've got it covered on rotoballer.com. Woo Fantasy gives you that special discount at checkout, so enter that in at rotoballer.com. And, of course, FanDuel, Underdog, we've got you covered there. FanDuel, Woo Fantasy promo code, Underdog, promo code Woo, get you an extra $25 when you first deposit into Underdog. So go jump in there, throw the promo code in, and get started with some best ball drafts, because it's a great way to get you ready for your drafts as we get ready for the 2021 season. Best ball drafts are slowly taking the place of mock drafts. You can price point them at anywhere you want to. $1 draft, $3 drafts, $5, the $25 million, the $1 million draft, Best Ball Mania 2. Jump in there as well. So definitely check those out on Underdog and use that promo code WOO. But where can they find you on Twitter, Mr. Heffley?
Find me up, look me up at the Real FF Goat.
And then I, of course, am the Roto Superstar on Twitter, and this is Woo_Fantasy. And until next time, guys, join us for another episode of Woo Fantasy.